On this episode of Narcissist Apocalypse, we talk with an abuse survivor named Courage, and Courage was in a controlling relationship with a physical abuser. It's a story of objectification, jealousy, isolation, reverse caretaking, suicide, and survival. Welcome to Narcissist Apocalypse, everyone. I am Brandon Chadwick, and with me today we have Courage. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am doing well, and thank you for asking. And if you want to be a guest like Courage is today, please do go to our website at narcissistapocalypse.com and click on the guest form button, and that is at the top of the page. And there you can read all of our instructions, and please read them all and either send us an email at narcissistapocalypse@gmail.com or fill out our guest form and press the submit button, and please do send it in the format that we ask for. And we have a content warning for today's survivor story for today's episode, as we do have graphic discussions of physical abuse, sexual assault, and suicide in this episode. It's a very difficult episode to listen to, so this is your content warning for today. And today you're going to hear Courage's story, and it took a lot for Courage to be here today. Her relationship was only 6 months, but so much happened in this short amount of time, and it was hard for Courage to put the abuse label on what happened, but she eventually did, and that was the beginning of her healing process, and hopefully her sharing today will help with alleviating what she's been through, while helping so many of you out there. And this isn't an easy story to tell. It's not an easy story to hear. So a big warning on this episode once again, and a big thank you to Courage for being here. And now I'm going to get out of my way and your way. Courage, the floor is now yours.
So starting with my background, I had a pretty normal and good childhood. My parents were incredibly supportive of me and raised me in a very stable environment. Somewhat helicopter parents at times, but they always had my best interest and safety in mind. They pretty much gave me everything I could ever need and want. So my family and friends were very confused when I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety at a young age, just because my upbringing had been so normal and so great. I think when I was first diagnosed with depression, it really came from my own identity and perception of myself. I was an extreme perfectionist and a very quiet girl, didn't really have a lot of friends. Growing up, I was in a competitive pre-professional ballet school, and it was definitely kind of a cutthroat world. From a very young age, I was bullied a lot, so I had a very low self-esteem and perception of myself from a young age.
Did you want to be in this pre-professional ballet school, or was this something your parents pushed for?
No, not at all. It was definitely something I really wanted to do, and I loved ballet. I loved dancing. So despite the really toxic environment, I still wanted to keep going.
And you were diagnosed with depression and anxiety at a very young age. Is this something your parents asked you questions about? Did they start to notice that this was going on, or were you comfortable enough with them that you went to them and trusted them with how you were feeling and what was going on with you?
I think they probably noticed first. My mom and I are very in tune, and so I think she noticed that I was really starting to struggle first with anxiety, and then the depression came along. They were both very supportive of me. After a little bit, they put me into therapy, and I started seeing a therapist around the age of 13.
And when it came to this pre-professional ballet school, did they ever have the thought, like, maybe this isn't the best idea for you or the best environment for you, and like take executive decision here and say it's best for you to not do this right now because it's not affecting you very well?
I would say that A lot of times in the ballet world, especially when you get higher up and you get more competitive, they don't always, I mean, not everyone, I'm not going to say everyone, but they don't always have your mental health in mind. I remember there was this one time I was at a summer intensive, which is when you're out of school for the summer and you dance all day, every day. We had a guest teacher who was very strict, and my dog had just died. And so I was very visibly upset. And we were rehearsing a number, and he literally told me, "You're depressing, your face is depressing me, get in the back." So it was just a very toxic environment from every person. So eventually I had to stop ballet because I had severe scoliosis, and I had to get pretty extensive back surgery and was told I would no longer be able to dance ever again. And so while I was transitioning out of a very toxic environment, it was incredibly hard for me because I loved to dance. I thought that's what I wanted to do forever. And even though I was leaving that toxic environment, I was just kind of trading it for another. High school was very difficult for me. I lost a lot of friends, and I put the blame on myself for feeling very isolated and alone. So that when I turned about 14 years old, that's when things really took a turn, and the depression stemmed from just feeling isolated and lonely to more of a traumatic experience. When I was 14 years old, someone in my life started molesting me. That's where my identity kind of shifted into thinking of myself as an object. And from the age of 14 on, I really noticed how I was treated by people, in particular men, if they said inappropriate things, if they grabbed me without my consent, and my own self-worth and self-perception really plummeted. And that I continued that perception of myself for many years until I reached college. And in college, it really only got worse. You're surrounded by, college kids getting drunk and making bad decisions. And there are lots of times where I feel like I was treated like an object instead of as a person. Things really reached a climax sophomore year in college when I was at a bar with a friend of mine, and she had left with a guy. I think I maybe had one drink, 1.5, and that's where my memory completely stops. I woke up in a house I didn't know with my shirt on, but my lumber garments off. And it really only took me a few seconds to realize I had been drugged and raped. There's no one in the room with me, so I pretty much started out the house and very quickly walked back to campus. And so I was just kind of dealing with that trauma for about a month. And then I think it was about a month later, I started to bleed. First, I just thought it was my period, but it very quickly started to become a massive amount of blood. First, I had no idea what was happening. Kind of a partly irrational part of my brain thought I was dying because of how much blood I was losing. After about 15 minutes, I remembered what happened a month ago and realized I was probably having a miscarriage. And so I went and got blood work done the next day or 2 days after, and they confirmed that I had been pregnant but was no longer pregnant. So this started this really intense battle within myself because I felt incredibly depressed because of how I got pregnant, and I was only 20 at the time, but also this feeling of relief because I was only 20, I was still in school, but that relief made me feel incredibly guilty. So it was really this culmination of all these emotions. And I very quickly became suicidal because of all these emotions building up and this battle within myself. I recognized that I needed help, so I went to the University Counseling Center, and they said that I needed to go to the local mental hospital and make sure I did not hurt myself. So I voluntarily said I would go. My mom brought me, and I checked myself in. Well, my experience there was necessary. It was probably not the greatest. I was there for about a week, which felt like a month because time moves so slow. I was really shocked at how the hospital was different from my perception of it. There were 3 different wards. I was in the depression ward, so everything and everyone was very normal and calm. It was really just a small group of people that were depressed and didn't want to be here anymore. But the department wasn't very somber like you think it would be. There were a lot of lively personalities. I remember when I woke up that first morning, I walked into the family room dining area to get my blood drawn and my vitals taken. And it was almost felt like I was walking into someone's house because everyone was at the breakfast table chatting and laughing. And I was almost confused. I was like, this does not seem like a mental hospital with a bunch of people with depression. There's also not a lot to do, lots of downtime between group therapy. And the only thing there really was to do was a couple of puzzles and some self-help books and the Bible. So there would be like multiple hour stretches where I would just stare at a wall. It was pretty awful. They would feel like a week. It was also very physically uncomfortable. Like I said earlier, I had some pretty severe back problems, and the bed mattress was about 2 inches thick, and all the chairs were made out of plastic. So I was pretty sore and in pain. Needless to say, I was very happy when I was discharged and went outside for the first time in a week, about a week later. After that period of time with the assault and being in the hospital, I didn't date anyone for a while because of just the whole experience with the assault and the miscarriage. So I kind of took some time for myself. That was until I met a guy who was working at this nice cocktail bar that I often went to. And that's when I started dating the guy that I will be talking about. We had a mutual friend who introduced us, and I just thought he was really cute and charismatic. After the initial meeting, we chatted every time I'd go to the bar, and it eventually led to him asking me out. But before we went out, there was this one night he invited me over to his place to watch a movie. And I think we stayed up for 7 or 8 hours straight just talking. And I felt like I had never really gotten along with someone so well and just been able to talk to someone about anything and everything for hours on end. It was an instant connection. The details he initially told me about his life were somewhat vague. He had a sister, a mom, a stepdad. Didn't really talk to his birth dad too much. His interests were in music and ancient philosophy. About the deeps he went was telling me that he had been pretty horribly cheated on by his past 2 girlfriends, one of which had cheated on him very blatantly for 2 years. So I didn't really get to know the darker side of him and his past until months later. We started dating and everything seemed perfect, but our feelings escalated extremely quickly. We started talking about marriage, I think, only after a month of dating. And that's when that's when he started to reveal his very jealous side. And it started as very small things that I didn't realize were controlling. For instance, I wasn't allowed to work out or go to the gym because if he thought that if I worked out, I would get more fit. And in his words, I would get too hot for him and leave him. He didn't let me wear certain clothes. For instance, I was going to dinner with a friend and my sweater was slightly cropped. And he pretty much would not let me go to dinner until I changed. Then the controlling and jealousy became very apparent. I was at a university with 2 of my exes, and my relationship with them ended very amicably. We weren't going out and grabbing dinner every weekend together, but if we saw each other, we would acknowledge each other, maybe ask how each other's family is doing. And that's what happened one day on campus. I was standing in line to get COVID tested because we had just come back from quarantine. And one of my exes joins me in line, and we're standing together maybe for 2 minutes. So we say hi, how are you doing? How's your family? And then we part ways. And that was pretty much the entire extent of our conversation. But I had always told my then boyfriend I was dating at the time that I would always be completely transparent with him because of everything that had happened in his past with being cheated on. So when I got back to his apartment that day, I told him that I'd run into an ex, and his demeanor immediately changed. He started interrogating me about what happened, and I relayed exactly what happened to him, but he became incredibly irate. He started yelling and screaming. He was incredibly beside himself that I was even within 20 feet of my ex. And then it even escalated to the point where he didn't want me going to that university anymore because there was a chance that I might see my ex. And he even made it a point that it was unfair to him because his two exes didn't live in town, so I would never run into them. But it was unfair to him that I went to the same school with two of my exes and I had a chance of running into them on campus. So he essentially wanted me to quit school or move to the local community college. And at the time, I was at a pretty prestigious university that I worked extremely hard to get into. And up until that point, I had been under the impression that he was really proud that I went there. Anytime he introduced me to someone, he would always mention what college I went to, almost to the point where sometimes I kind of felt like a prized pig.
So at this point, you've had multiple instances of jealousy that is going on. And also, he doesn't like you wearing certain types of clothing. Controlling behavior is happening. So how are you rationalizing these things at this point? Are you making excuses for him? Is the thing about how his exes cheated on him really taken hold, and you've taken that seriously to the point where, like, you do not want to be who they are? He was been hurt so much that I don't want to put him in that hurt again, and you are an empathetic person, so when he gets hurt, you're just feeling of his hurt. Like, are you thinking about your needs at this point, or are you already, like, in their world?
I think I made a lot of excuses for him. He clearly was very traumatized by being cheated on for multiple years. And I wanted to prove to him that I was nothing like his exes, that I was very truthful. I was very forthcoming. And so I think I made a lot of excuses for his behavior and kind of put my feelings on the back burner to make sure that he was taken care of and he was comfortable and I was being completely truthful with him. So yes, the jealousy and controlling only got worse. Like I said before, all my relationships in the past ended pretty amicably. So I never had that typical moment where I went through my phone and deleted their contact or deleted all the pictures we ever took together. So there was this one day where he asks me if I still had pictures of my exes. And I hadn't even thought about if I had pictures of them in maybe a year because it never crossed my mind. I never went through the horrible breakup where I got rid of all the pictures and deleted their contacts. So I told him, oh, I don't know, maybe. And he became completely unhinged yet again, yelling, screaming, backed me into a corner, eventually stormed out of the apartment. So I wanted to make him happy, and while he was gone, I went through my phone and deleted all the pictures. He comes back about 15 minutes later and looks at me and says, did you delete those pictures? And I was like, of course. That's what you wanted. And he becomes extremely mad all over again because, according to him, if I went through those pictures and deleted them, then I had to look at them, which meant I reminisced about those memories with them. So at that point, I was just really confused because I got rid of the pictures like he wanted, but the process of getting rid of them made him extremely irate. So I felt like I couldn't win.
So when something like this happens here, because this is very confusing, there's no way you can erase photos without looking at those photos unless someone does it for you. So this is alarming behavior, and you didn't do anything wrong. at all. So how are you taking this? Because you also said, I want to make him happy. So once again, you're thinking of them and you're not thinking of yourself. So I guess what is your thought process, besides the confusion, or maybe there isn't any other thought process?
I think I just once again made excuses. He clearly was not over being cheated on. He constantly brought it up and constantly was afraid that I was going to cheat on him. So I think I just was always making excuses for his just behavior. It was confusing, but it was also very hurtful because up until that point, I had done nothing and I never did anything to betray his trust. So it was also just very hurtful that I was being compared to these two exes when I had done nothing wrong. So it was hurtful, but at the same time, I just kept making excuses.
And from here, eventually something physical does happen. So walk us through this part of your relationship.
Yes. So this was another instance where my exes were involved. He asked me to block all my exes' numbers and social media. And I told him yes, because I had done that because he mentioned earlier that I had to do this. And then he starts to list off social media platforms to verify that I blocked them on social media. So he goes Snapchat, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. And that kind of made me remember that I had a Twitter. I don't think I had used Twitter in almost a year, so I completely forgot that I even had it. So when he said Twitter, I said, oh, I completely forgot about Twitter. Let me see if I still follow them on there because I haven't been on it in a year. And yet again, he went into a complete rampage. Because in his mind, I had purposely not blocked them on Twitter. It was a purposeful thing. It wasn't me forgetting. So I was hiding something to him. So he starts with the yelling and the screaming. And then things become more violent. He throws his phone across the room and it shatters. And then he strikes me across the face. And I immediately burst into tears. And he sees how upset I got. And he starts just profusely apologizing. And he gets extremely upset and starts crying and is absolutely beside himself to the point where I have to ignore what he just did and comfort him because he's so beside himself. And this wasn't the only time that this happened. There was one time at a bar where he kind of belittled me in front of his friends and made a joke about me. And I got upset with him and angry with him. And so in the car ride home, I told him that I was upset with him. And he once again becomes extremely upset with himself, crying, saying how sore he is. He's so visibly upset that I have to stop being mad at him to comfort him. So as the physical abuse begins and continues, he then starts to estrange me from all of my family and friends. I had been staying over at his apartment quite often, and my parents weren't too thrilled about it because they had been paying a lot of money for my own apartment near campus. So their one request was that I just stay the night in my apartment on school nights, and I could stay the night at his place on the weekend. I think that's a pretty reasonable request when they're paying for an apartment that I'm never in. He spins it as they're incredibly controlling and they don't want us together. They're trying to break us up. They don't want me to be happy. He did this quite often. He would take something very small and spiral it out of control. He hated my parents. He thought that they were extremely controlling. He thought they were unreasonable. He thought they were trying to break us up, to the point where he made up rumors about them and would tell people that my dad was cheating on my mom. He didn't know anything about my dad. He only met him once. My mom traveled to Europe in the summer on her own to take intensive language courses. And she really loved the ability to travel independently for a couple of weeks because she was a teacher and had a bit of time in the summer while my dad worked. So she loved that experience of independent travel because she had never done it before. But my boyfriend twisted it, saying that my mom hated my dad so much that she traveled thousands of miles to get away from him. So he really just made up the nastiest rumors about my parents who he barely knew. And I had only said good things about them at this point. All because they didn't want me spending 24/7 in his apartment and wanted me to be able to hang out with my friends and stay at the apartment they were paying for and go to classes. But he spun it as they were controlling and didn't love me and were horrible people. And I was so in love with him and so connected to him that I believed him and started cutting my parents out of my life. I also started to cut my friends out of the picture. We were in college. My group of girlfriends and I would go out to a bar on a Friday or Saturday night. But eventually, I was not allowed to go out because, according to him, people only went to those bars, these typical college bars, to try to hook up with other people. So if I went there with a group of my girlfriends, I was pretty much cheating on him. And he was referring pretty much to every bar in the area. I wasn't allowed to go out to any bar on the weekend with my friends. And we went to a pretty competitive college, so the only time we really saw each other was on the weekends. So very soon, I wasn't allowed to hang out with my friends. And then that eventually escalated to I wasn't allowed to hang out with anyone. I was not allowed to leave his apartment without him because he was so codependent. And I was also a little codependent, admittedly. For instance, on Thursdays, I had class all day. And then when I got out of class, he had to go to work. So he was extremely upset that I was going to class, not spending time with him. I told him, I'll go to work with you. I'll sit at the bar and do my homework while you're working, and we'll be able to spend time together on Thursdays. But to him, that wasn't quality time. So he again spun it as, well, if I can't see you Thursdays, why are we even dating? So I eventually started going to classes on Thursdays because he wouldn't let me. And then eventually it turned into I wasn't allowed to go to class ever, which was really difficult for me. Being a student and being a good student had always been a huge part of my identity. And he kind of took that. My grades plummeted because the only time I was allowed to study was when he was working. And I had to be at the bar with him while I was studying. And studying at a bar is not the greatest idea. I don't recommend it. I never went to class. And I became completely isolated from everyone except for him.
So already what's happened in a very short amount of time is there's a lot of controlling behavior. There's a lot of jealousy that is going on. And you've been belittled in front of others as well. Whenever you try to have feelings, they go into I'm a terrible person mode. So all of a sudden you're caretaking them. You want to make them happy. Extreme isolation has gone on, from cutting you off from exes and erasing on phones to going out with friends to him bad-mouthing your parents and saying that they're not great people. He's putting a wedge in between all of you. And now here we have, your school is now suffering. Your grades are now suffering. That's a big part of your identity of who you are and how you take pride in yourself. And then this starts to creep into depression. For a lot of people out there who are listening, who are friends and family of someone who's going through these things, here are a lot of telltale signs that friends and family can see and literally see that you're not around as much as you were, that you are, maybe staying in more, that you are having, depression or anxiety might be ramping up. and that you're just not the same person anymore. And this has happened very quickly for you. This has happened, your whole relationship was only 6 months long. So this is really quick that this is going on. So is anyone expressing concerns of what's going on? Because you're 100% wrapped up in their world, that they are the truth teller of your world. The isolation has begun, and that, you know, you're tending to everything for them. You know, you're going to work with them because they don't want you away from them. They're trying to keep you and control you to be all of theirs. So has anyone noticed, or is anyone saying anything? And have you mentioned anything to other people about like little hints, kind of like feelers of like, maybe this isn't right, you know, just to like a little glimpse of like, oh, I'm not allowed to go do that, or like, oh, he gets upset if I'm going out on a Thursday?
I think everyone knew. I don't know if everyone knew the extent that the abuse had gone physical, but they definitely knew that he was controlling. While I cut out my parents, they had never stopped contacting me that entire time. They were constantly reaching out to me, asking how I was doing, you know, what I did during my day, just constantly trying to keep tabs on me. I think I later learned that my friends had reached out to my parents because they had noticed. I think it was yet again another time I was making excuses for him when my friends invited me out to a bar, you know, on a Friday night. I would tell them, oh, he's just not comfortable with me going. And I think that was definitely a red flag to them. And they contacted my parents. So at this point, everyone knew that something bad was going on. You know, they weren't saying you cannot spend time with this person, even though they knew he was toxic. I think they knew that would just drive me further away. So I think they were somewhat strategic about it and just kept tabs on me throughout the day, making sure that I was all right, that what I was doing throughout the day, how I was feeling. They kept in contact with my roommate that I essentially never saw, asking, you know, has she been at the apartment at all today? Did she go to class? And so they were in constant contact with me and with my roommate and my friends to make sure I was okay.
And as this is happening and all this stuff is unfolding, you eventually realize that sexual abuse has been happening throughout this time. So walk us through this part.
Yes. So although I didn't realize it at the time, I think he was somewhat of a sex addict. If I didn't have sex with him whenever and wherever he wanted, then I wasn't attracted to him, which meant I didn't love him. And if I didn't love him, what was the point of being together? Like I said earlier, he tended to take a very small situation and make it into something huge. So he pretty much coerced me into doing whatever he wanted. I was not allowed to say no in fear that he would leave me because I was also pretty codependent on him as well. Especially with everyone else pretty much out of my life, he was all I had. So he pretty much coerced me into doing whatever he wanted, which also at the same time was very violent. There was one time he put his hands on my neck and they just lasted there a little too long, and they became harder and stronger to the point where I got a little hazy and out of it. So he also was just very violent, and I wasn't allowed to say no to that because, again, if I said no to anything, I didn't love him. I was also afraid of making him mad because not only if I said no would it make him upset. In the past, when he's got upset, he's gotten physically violent. So, you know, who knows what would happen if I said no? Would he leave me? Would he hit me? Would it get worse? I didn't know what would happen if I said no. So I just did whatever he wanted. And there was one time where the coercion turned into something different. What started with consent eventually turned into rape. I told him to stop. He didn't. I thought maybe he didn't hear me, so I kind of tried pushing him away, and he pinned my arms against my side. So I didn't really recognize that that was assault, because it started with consent. And so I didn't really recognize that was assault and that that was not good and horrible. For a long time after that, I didn't recognize that. And again, the hitting happened a few more times after that. He was just a very violent and angry person, and I felt very trapped. Then one day, my parents had finally convinced me to stay the night at my apartment, because they essentially said, if you're not going to stay at your apartment, then we're going to stop paying for it. Completely fair. So I stayed the night at my apartment that night, and I woke up in the morning for class and texted him good morning, and I noticed the text turned green instead of the iMessage blue. And my immediate thought was, he's mad at me for some reason, because he would do this. He would block me from all communication if he got mad at me, so I had no way of communicating with him. Instead of talking out our problems, he would just block me. So I wasn't able to communicate with him. But the rational part of my brain was like, no, maybe his phone just died. It's fine. So I tried not to panic. But I began to panic around noon when he still hadn't answered. And then noon turns into 1 o'clock. So I texted his mom asking if she had heard from him, and she hadn't. So she goes over there and knocks on his door, because at the time I didn't have a car to get over there. So she goes over there, knocks on his door and waits for an answer. He doesn't answer, even though his car is out front. So he's at the apartment, but he's not answering the door. She said later she had a very horrible feeling, but instead of calling the police, she comes and gets me because I have the key to the apartment. So I unlock the apartment door and go in first. I turn the corner into his bedroom, and his closet had those slats so you could see into and through the door. And that's when I saw his dead body hanging in his closet. And I can still very vividly remember everything down to what he was wearing. And the thing that stuck with me most was how blue his lips were, to the point they almost looked black. His mom and I immediately started to panic, which, when I say that out loud, that's kind of a complete understatement for how we felt and how we were reacting in the moment. It was just extreme terror and panic in that moment. After the initial shock, she calls 911, and they tell us we need to cut him down. So I run to the kitchen and get a knife, and I held on to his cold body while she cuts the belt to get him down. The only thing I could think of to do in that moment while we were waiting for the police to arrive was to call my mom, because she had been everything to me up until that point. So I kind of reverted back to, I need my mom. And I couldn't be in the room with his body any longer. So I remember going out into the living room, and I call my mom, and I just say, he's dead. And my legs completely give out, and I crumple to the floor. For about 5 straight minutes, I think all I could say was, he's dead. So my mom immediately leaves work and starts towards his apartment to come be with me. His mom comes out and says I need to stand outside and wave down the police and firemen, because he lived in a pretty big apartment complex, so it'd just be faster for them to get here if someone was waiting outside. So I go outside, and it's snowing. About 5 minutes later, I see a fire truck, and I bring them inside. And I remember I couldn't be in the apartment, so I'm out in the stairwell. I'm on the phone with my mom, just in complete hysterics, and police officer stayed with me in the stairwell, because I was clearly not okay. She eventually shows up, and we are all asked to wait outside because they have to do an investigation, and the coroner needs to examine the body. And we must have been outside in the snow for a few hours. I didn't have a coat on, but I didn't feel anything. my dad eventually shows up, and my dad is one of those people that never really cries often, but seeing me and how inconsolable I was, he started to cry. And that was really hard to see as well. And it seemed like we were waiting outside for hours until they eventually wheeled his body out into the van. His mom and I were maybe asked 2 questions by the coroner, and we left. And that's how that day ended.
And, as far as your feelings go on the day, are you blaming yourself at this time? Like, what is kind of going through your mind, or you're just in shock?
I think for that day, I was in shock. And then part of it turned into self-blame and also anger once again at my parents. Because, if my parents hadn't made me stay at my apartment, I would have been with him at his apartment. He wouldn't have hung himself. So it was a lot of blame, both on my parents and then also on myself not being good enough, and him thinking that he didn't love me enough to stay with me. Because, like I mentioned earlier, our relationship escalated extremely quickly. We were talking about marriage 1 month in. So to me, this was the man I was going to marry. And now he's killed himself. So what could I have done differently? Why was I not enough for him to stay? The funeral was a pretty big blur. His mother asked me to speak at it, and I don't really remember much of what I said at all. But after the funeral, we had a dinner at the bar he worked at. His friends had always been very nice to me, but they were not the best influences. They drank heavily and did drugs. I had always been kind of a goody-goody, so I'd never really been surrounded by people like that. So after and even before the funeral, they really encouraged me to drink heavily and just drink the pain away so I wouldn't remember anything. And that's exactly what happened. I remember getting to the second bar with everyone that night, and that's where my memory completely stops. And the next thing I know, I woke up in the mental hospital again. Like I mentioned earlier, I'd been there in the past, so I knew where I was. I just had absolutely no recollection of how I got there. And my parents to this day won't really tell me what I did to end up in the hospital. But as soon as I realized where I was, I did not want to be there again. I just wanted to be with my mom, and I wanted to get out. So I called my mom, begging her to get me out. And I can just tell she sounds broken when she says she can't. So I go to the nurse's station and I ask for an AMA form, which stands for Against Medical Advice. It's pretty much when you sign a paper to be released from the hospital against medical advice. Not even an hour later, my AMA was denied because the doctor said I was too traumatized to leave and I was a danger to myself. So I was there for over a week this time. I don't think it was a very therapeutic experience. I think it was solely to keep myself safe at that point. And that's when I had experienced PTSD before, but this was a whole new level of trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder. The nightmares were extremely vivid, and I'd wake up screaming. I would have flashbacks of finding his body, and I'd come out of the flashbacks again just in sheer terror. So I'd never really experienced PTSD like that before. I was eventually released and went home, and I stayed at a home for the rest of the semester, the school semester. I did return to classes 2 weeks after the hospital, but I stayed at home with my mom, and she did not leave me once. She did take my phone away because she said, well, while you're in the hospital, you don't have any electronics, you don't have any access to the internet or your phone. And so she continued to hold on to my phone because she said I needed to focus on healing and recovery. I didn't know at that point there was another reason she was keeping my phone. While I was in the hospital, his mother had been calling and texting my mother, harassing and threatening her, saying that her son had killed himself because of my mother. I found this out because she had texted my phone trying to get a hold of my mother. I was a little sneaky, and even though I didn't have a phone, I had my computer, which had iMessage on it. So I found the text. And when I found out this was going on, it created a whole new level of anxiety I'd never experienced before. When you're in the mental hospital, it's very understimulating. So it can be very shocking to go from that environment to, for instance, a grocery store where there's lots of colors and people and things going on. So learning about this whole situation was very anxiety inducing. It was also very hurtful. His mom was repeatedly harassing my mom, and I didn't know if she was going to come after her and hurt her. This was all because my boyfriend didn't like my mom and thought she was controlling. Even though it had nothing to do with my mom, he had been suicidal for years. Even at the funeral, his mom read a couple of his suicide notes from the years past. So this was a long time coming. It had nothing to do with my mom. I think his mom just needed someone to blame. And my mom, for some reason, was an easy target.
Was there comfort for you in the fact that there were previous attempts, so you knew that this wasn't about you per se?
Yes and no. It's weird to use the word comfort, but yes, because I knew that he'd been struggling with it for a while, so maybe it didn't have everything to do with me. But it was also, hard to hear that he had been dealing with this for so long and that we didn't see it coming and we didn't stop it. So yes and no.
Well, from your point of view, because you're always thinking of other people, this could be devastating in the sense of you were abused, and then to have the thought process of that my partner, suicide occurred, and maybe blaming that on yourself, and the fact that this had already been a part of their life, and the suicide in itself can be seen in some instances for some people as a continuation maybe of the abuse, or to you're not paying attention to me. Well, guess what? I'm going to leave you with this last bit of information. That could be devastating. And to have that point made specifically to you. So that's why I kind of use the word comfort, knowing that, this was inevitable in what was going on, that this person was going to have this outcome. And that you really weren't the reason for it happening, because I know from our previous discussion that you did not want to speak ill of someone who has passed away, and that you wanted to be here to discuss, abuse. And, part of a lot of people's, or part of some people's abuse story could have this specific ending, and that you wanted to discuss the abuse, how quick it was, how fast it was, how controlling it was, but also this aspect of things, because it's rarely talked about. This is the first time we've had this on the show. We've had suicidal ideation before and threats of suicide, but not this instance before. So I think that's kind of where I was coming from a little, about what you've been going through, or maybe how you're handling it, or how you're seeing things.
Yes, so that was actually brought up to me by someone that he knew in that moment when he made that decision that I'd be the one to find his body, because I was the only one with the key to his apartment. So I had to be the one to find his body when he made that decision. His mom also my mom said that she will never forgive her for this, but instead of calling the police when he didn't answer the door and his car was outside, she chose to come get me and have me unlock the door and go in and find his body. I think part of the abuse did continue because he knew I'd be the one to find his body because I was the only one with the key to the apartment. He knew when he made that decision. Because I've had those thoughts before, and my thought was the only thing that stopped me was who is this going to affect, and also who's going to be the one to find my body if I were to kill myself. And he knew that I was the only one with the key to his apartment, and I would be the one to find him.
So from here, all of these things are going on, and your anxiety as well starts to ramp up even more than it was before because, your mom is being blamed for this by his mom. His mom is trying to find someone to blame, and it's understandable. It happens all the time. So talk about now, I guess, your anxiety of what you were experiencing.
So my anxiety just reached a whole new level that I'd never experienced before. I just didn't know how to handle everything. And so in my mind, I just kind of said, I don't want to handle it. I want to forget everything. And I did. I remember sitting in my chair in my bedroom, facing my bed, and just kind of thinking to myself repeatedly, I wish this would all go away. I wish I would just forget all this happened. I want it to go away. And it sounds strange saying this, but almost like a wave came over me. And I forgot everything. I remembered what he looked like. I remembered what his apartment looked like. But I forgot every date we had ever been on. I forgot everything we'd ever talked about. And it was later that I learned about something called dissociative amnesia, which is a kind of amnesia or gaps in memory that is triggered by very traumatic events. And from what I understand, your brain is just kind of trying to protect you from those events and remembering those events. But usually, eventually, the memories come back. So I did start to regain memories. It was strange. It was very slowly and very randomly. Like I'd be at the grocery store and I'd see an avocado, and then I'd remember, oh, he loved avocados. And so it was a very slow and gradual process to get my memory back. But as far as I know, I have all my memories back. Besides, just regular forgetting that happens to everyone. But as far as I know, I have all my memories back. And so I don't think I dated anyone after him for about 2.5 years. And for those 2 years, I mourned him. I didn't realize I was in an abusive relationship because he was gone. And I think it was the combination of my brain protecting me and the whole you don't speak ill of the dead. So I didn't realize I was in an abusive relationship until I started dating my current boyfriend, who is really just the epitome of a healthy relationship in every way. He's kind, he's the boundaries, he respects me, he encourages me to see my family and spend time with my friends, because it's kind of shocking after the relationship that I'd been in. Like, oh, he wants me to spend time away from him and spend time with my friends. Like that was a little weird to me. But he was just the complete opposite in every way. And he was so healthy. And he was the one who made me realize that I had been in such a toxic, abusive relationship before in comparison to what I was going through now. And that's when kind of my identity and perception of myself became very confusing and started to crumble. Because now that I'm in a healthy relationship and I'm able to recognize that the relationship before had been abusive, I kind of questioned myself, like, how could I not see that was wrong? It was so apparent. I mean, the hitting, the sexual abuse, it was so apparent. How did I not realize it? And so I kind of thought, like, what's wrong with me? And I kind of questioned everything for the past few years. And I had this new identity of being a victim, and I felt like a victim. And it took a lot of work and therapy and healing to feel like a survivor instead of a victim. And that was a really long process of both admitting to myself that I'd been through all of this, but also admitting it wasn't my fault and that I did what I had to do to keep myself safe. And at least that's what I thought I was doing at the moment. I thought during that moment I was doing the best thing for myself to keep myself safe. So it took a lot of going back and forth with what I had been through, what I was going through now, what my relationship was like with my parents, what my perception of myself was. Because for so long, I had just been an object. Since the age of 14, I had been an object. And now I had kind of come into this new sense of empowerment where, I wasn't a victim, I was a survivor. And it took a lot of work to kind of hone this identity from someone who was so broken to someone of strength.
So when it comes to your relationship, in the history of your relationship, on many instances when you expressed that you were upset, they went into victim mode, and then you started to caretake them. So within this whole process, with them dying by suicide, you then went into kind of the same process, it sounds like, that you're doing your best for yourself, but that them dying by suicide, you're now kind of seeing them for a long time in the same way. You're caretaking that in some sort of way, that you're thinking about them more than you're thinking about yourself in instances. Is that fair to say?
I think so. I mean, I had extreme suicidal ideation before. I know the mindset that people go through, and I think I really empathized with that and, continued to make excuses and continued to ignore what he did because I knew the pain he had been in to make that decision.
So I guess part of your healing process has been to think about yourself more, because even in this process of how you would come and caretake them, even in death, you were caretaking that person over yourself. And for you to kind of break free from all of this and understand that this whole entire thing was abuse was to actually focus on yourself, it sounds like.
Yes. I think if I were to give anyone listening one piece of advice, is that at the end of the day, you're all you have. And though it may seem selfish to say out loud, you have to prioritize yourself over everything and everyone, because at the end of the day, you're all you have. And I think that's what it took for me to recognize everything that had been going on, was to, for one, prioritize myself and my well-being.
And I was about to ask you for your words of wisdom, but you beat me to it. Do you have any more? Do you have any more words of wisdom for us before we end off your story?
I think just keep in contact with your support system. Find a support system. It could be family, it could be friends, it could be a therapist. Reach out to someone, because throughout the whole process, everyone in my life knew what was going on, and they desperately tried to keep a hold of me throughout it, even when I tried to cut them out. So even when you feel like you're alone and isolated, know that you're not, and that you have a support system, you have someone there for you, and to reach out to them when you feel like you need help.
Well, Courage, I really want to thank you for being our guest today, dealing with all my technical difficulties. It's hard enough telling your story, but to also have me saying that we have to go back and re-record some parts is not a thing I want to do to survivors who are really putting themselves in harm's way by telling their story. And your story was really not an easy one to tell. You had to put yourself in harm's way to do so. And I know you really wanted to help other people, which you did today, especially the ones who have dealt with suicide and that being placed on you. So a big, big, big thank you for being here once again, Courage, just for being here with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for giving people and survivors a platform to share their story and hopefully help someone else that's listening and let them know that they're not alone.
Well, thank you, Courage, for being here once again. And if you want to be a guest like Courage was today, please do go to our website at narcissistapocalypse.com and click the guest form button at the top of the page. There you can read all of our instructions, and please read them all. And either send it to narcissistapocalypse@gmail.com or fill out our guest form and press the submit button, and please do send it in the format that we ask for. Also at our website, we have a support group. So if you need support, join our support group by clicking on the support group button at the top of the page at narcissistapocalypse.com. Inside, you'll see that we have Zoom meetings every Wednesday night, Thursday afternoons, and Saturday nights. We have forum boards for you to post on to get the validation that you need from survivors just like you. It is a wonderful group of people on there, and you can make a lot of friends too. So if you need support, join our support group today. And if you need even more support, please do visit our friends at domesticshelters.org. At domesticshelters.org, they have articles and resources to help you make sense of everything that you're dealing with. And they have every phone number, email address, web address for shelters and agencies. No matter how big or small the town you are in, domesticshelters.org has it there. So if you need extra support, please do go to domesticshelters.org. And we have other friends of the show called Shelter Movers, and Shelter Movers can be found at sheltermovers.com. And what they do is they help you move all of your stuff from your home into storage, and that can be your pets and livestock too. So if you're trying to get out of domestic violence and coercive control and you need help leaving the home, getting all of your stuff out of the home and into storage, sheltermovers.com can help you do that. They can get everything into storage, including homes or including places for your pets and livestock too. This is currently only available in Canada. It is a donor-supported charitable organization, so if you need help from them or want to donate to them, go to sheltermovers.com. And that is it for today's survivor story, for today's episode. So for myself and Courage, we hope you have a good night.